Hey guys, welcome back. Well, it's another video about English proficiency, but this time it's much bigger than any state law like Arkansas or Oklahoma, because as of yesterday, Monday, April 28th, English proficiency requirements and enforcement went federal, meaning applying to each and every state. Now, I know that English proficiency is already a law that is within the FMCSA, however, it is not enforced. The thing that makes this such big news is that it's about to return to the out of service criteria. So let's talk about the executive order that was signed yesterday, what it's all about, and what it means for the future. Ready? Let's go! Now, to understand this executive order, we need to understand why it's happening. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has long required commercial motor vehicle drivers to understand and speak English well enough in order to be able to understand and read traffic signs, communicate with officers and the public, and this was all in the name of safety. But enforcement has been pretty spotty and at times non-existent. The question is, why? Well, in 2016, the FMCSA issued guidance that kind of scaled back that strict enforcement, and it allowed certain drivers with a lack of English proficiency to operate under certain conditions. Now, this was in response to, at least some people say it was in response to, but the fact is it happened right after the Commercial Motor Vehicle Safety Alliance, the CVSA, removed English proficiency from the out-of-service criteria, which basically made it impossible to place a driver out of service for a lack of English proficiency. Now, let's fast forward to 2025. Trump's team, including Secretary Sean Duffy, argued that clear communication ensures that drivers can follow safety protocols and ultimately avoid accidents. So now that I gave you a little bit of a background, let's get into this executive order straight from the White House, which is titled Enforcing Common Sense Rules of the Road for America's Truck Driver. And this is what it says. Number one, it instructs the FMCSA to revoke the 2016 guidance that relaxed enforcement for English proficiency. Number two, it instructs that the out-of-service criteria must be updated to reflect that drivers who are not proficient enough in English be placed out of service. Number three, it instructs Secretary Sean Duffy to, and I quote, review state issuance of non-domiciled CDLs to identify any irregularities and ensure American drivers are validly licensed and qualified. And number four, the order directs the Secretary of Transportation to carry out additional administrative, regulatory, or enforcement actions to improve the working conditions of America's truck drivers. Now, all of this is directed to happen within 60 days of the executive order being signed. To top it off, and I'm going to quote this, a press release issued by the DOT yesterday recognized the executive order and called on the CVSA to update the out-of-service criteria to include the English proficiency standard. So now what does that mean? Well, we kind of talked about it in a video I did on Arkansas when they just passed the law, but I'm happy to repeat it again. If it's enforced the way it is written, then it might be a game changer. Since it's a federal law and it's a federal enforcement, that is the key word, enforcement, it's going to apply to all states. Now, think about it. I don't have the exact numbers of how many folks in the industry lack the English proficiency as defined by the FMCSA, but I'm pretty sure there are quite a few of them, at least from the comments I read and from what I hear from my team who is out on the road. Now let's jump a little bit ahead and talk about out-of-service orders. I'm going to give you an example, which probably a lot of you are very familiar with. This happened to us a couple of times, unfortunately. If you have a leaky tire, for example, and you're placed out of service, how do you get back on the road? Well, you have to change that tire. And very often, at least from my experience, they won't even let you drive 2 miles down the road to a truck stop. No, they place you out of service, which means your truck stays put until you change that tire, which means roadside assistance. Same thing with hours of service, out of service, right? If you are violating your logbook, they'll place you out of service and often order you to stay put for 10 hours. So the question that I had right away is, what does it take to get back on the road if you're placed out of service for a lack of English proficiency? Because that is not as easy to correct as, let's say, a screwed up tire. Now, of course, I tried to dig up to see what happened before, because there was a time when English proficiency was part of the out of service criteria, but sadly I came up short. I couldn't find anything. So anyone know? If you do, let me know in the comments. But yeah, I would imagine that getting this particular out of service order lifted when it relates to English proficiency would be a little bit more challenging. I don't know, let me know. But out of service orders are not just a pain in the butt when they happen, although they do kind of steal your time, right? And time is money. The bigger issue is constant out of service orders, especially if they're being repeated in a certain category, they can trigger more safety audits. There's also the possibility or the risk of getting a safety rating downgrade if the audit doesn't go the way you expected it to go, or a carrier, not a truck, a carrier being placed out of service, which basically means that that carrier has to halt all operations until the violations are addressed and compliance is achieved. Basically, to make it short, let's take a carrier, one carrier. More out of service orders for that carrier, especially if they're in the same category over and over again, equals more safety audits. And that gives more chances for the DOT to dig into your operations and find something iffy. And if they find something iffy, yeah, the list goes on and on. Now, out of service orders have everything to do with the business, right? The business side. But let's talk about the capacity side in the industry. The order could potentially reduce capacity by sidelining drivers. If a driver is inspected and fails the English proficiency part of the inspection, they're placed out of service, which means delayed deliveries. With millions of drivers in the US, even a small percentage of sidelined drivers could add up. Now, I'm going to quote a little statistic for you that is from the time when English proficiency was part of the out of service criteria. 4,000 of 100,000 proficiency violations led to out of service orders in 2014 per the OOIDA. So yeah, even that number, it could have an effect on capacity as a whole. So now I have a few questions that are unanswered for me. I would love to hear your opinions on this. Number one, do you think that this is going to be enforced? Number two, if the answer is yes, how strictly do you think it will be enforced? And finally, number three, do you think there will be folks who will actually be successful at finding a way around this? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts and eager to learn from you guys. Anyway, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.